If you have been reading ahead, you realize that this is a very pivotal point in the life of Jesus Christ, in his ministry here on this earth. This is a time, chapter 11 is right before he goes into Jerusalem for the last time. It's right before his Passion Week, really. It's set in this time period between the Hanukkah season and what they would call Passover, what we would worship as Passover. And so Jesus now, he's out. He's in Berea. It's a place beyond the Jordan on what we would see as the eastern side of the Jordan. And he's there doing ministry. And this is the story of Lazarus. You remember Mary and Martha, two sisters, and their brother Lazarus were very close to Jesus. And this is the story of Lazarus' death. It's kind of, you have to share the spoiler alert ahead of time. As we look through it, we're going to see Lazarus is going to die. And we need to know that as we study this first piece, because the way Jesus approaches this miracle, really, as we look at it, is from a different perspective than you and I would approach it. And really what you see here is this text is broken up into really three parts. The first part, which is what we're going to study today, is Jesus speaking to his disciples. He's going to give them all of the information, all of the punchline, so to speak, for the miracle he's about to do. This second part, which we'll look at next week, is going to be his time with Mary and Martha. And as he goes to the grave, as he goes to Mary and Martha to love on them, and we're going to look at specifically how Jesus deals with two radically different people and how he shepherds their personalities in the midst of their suffering. And then finally, after that, we're going to look at the way Jesus, or how the world looks at this, how the world looks at the miracles of Jesus, and we're going to actually see behind the curtain to the satanic root of why the world so hates the works of God and his people. And we're going to look at that. So this morning, we're going to look at specifically how do we get through, or how do we move beyond our suffering. And we've talked a little bit about this through the book of John, but it's very important that we come back to this, because this is what Jesus is going to hit with his disciples. It is so relevant to teach on this, because there's not a person in this room who has not been affected and is not right now still in the midst of some form of suffering. Can I get an amen? It's almost like the amen comes with laughter, right? Yeah, dude. Because we are all having to deal with in this life some form of suffering, some form of pain, whether it's a physical, your body is just breaking and you are being afflicted with physical pain, or it's an emotional pain. You've been abused, you've been hurt. The world around you has not been kind to you. And some of us, it's a spiritual pain, it's a torment that we've just been demonically tormented. And so as we go through this, we have to reconcile, how do we move on? Because for a lot of us, suffering and pain becomes like a chain around our leg, binding us to a moment in history. You know, as a counselor, I've had to deal with a lot of different issues specific to youth ministry, as I spent a lot of time in youth ministry. And one of the things we've learned is that kids who go through certain amounts of trauma in their life, it is as if they are chained to this period of time. And they can move on in certain respects, but whenever there's certain triggers in their life, they come right back to this moment in time. And it's what we call reverting. How many of you, if your parents are still alive, or if you remember doing this, when you go back to your parents' house, do you ever revert back to a childlike state? Me and my wife, we call it Rome Chris. Rome Chris. So Rome, I grew up in the city of Rome, Texas. It's a little town west of here. And we would start to drive, just like when my parents used to live there, when we would just get on the highway and we'd go down 35 and we'd get on 114, and as soon as we'd get on 114, all of a sudden my accent would change. And I would start to say stuff that was really and not bad, but we laughed because I lived on a piece of property and there was always a burn pile. You know what a burn pile is? It's a pile of wood that you set on fire. It's a burn pile. But I would never say burn pile. I would say burn pile. And we would laugh because for whatever reason, Chris would revert back to Rome Chris. Present day Chris would become childlike Chris when I would go there. And what we find is when we suffer and don't move past it and don't get beyond it, oftentimes we run right back to our previous states, the mode of operation that we had built within us through the patterns of this world, and we go back to those. And we try to muscle through our pain and our suffering and just cope. We bring on all these poor coping mechanisms to help us get through and just get beyond, just so I don't have to deal with this moment. And what Jesus is going to explain in this text is how to move beyond it. How to not have to ever revert back, ever come back, ever use worldly wisdom to have to deal with anything ever again. And in the midst of your suffering, be able to continue to move beyond it and never have yourself chained to it again. If you would, look at verse 1 in chapter 11 with me. And let's start with the background here. In verse 1, he says, "Now, a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord's feet and wiped his feet with her hair." Stop right there for just a second. Bethany is a city. It is right next to the Mount of Olives. So if you were to look at a map, Jerusalem would be on the west side of the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives where Jesus was arrested. The Mount of Olives where Jesus prayed, where there was a garden there that was, we believe, his favorite place to be. It's reminiscent of the places that the Bible says he will come again to and place his feet upon when he returns. This is Jesus's X marks the spot landing point, and he loved the Mount of Olives. And just to the east of it was a place called Bethany, a town. It was several miles from the Temple Mount, but it was an easy walk for them. And Mary and Martha lived there. Today, it's kind of enveloped in Jerusalem, and it's a part of the greater metropolis of the area. But Bethany is an area where Jesus spent a lot of time. John here in the text describes who Mary is. And if you move on to chapter 12, you actually see the story that he's going to describe here in verse 2. He describes the story in verse 12. And the reason he does that is because we realize that John is written many years after the resurrection of Jesus. This is how people knew who Mary was. They knew Mary by this incident that we're going to study in the future here in a few weeks of chapter 12. This is the one who wept on Jesus' feet, broke open the perfume bottle, and covered his feet, wiped his feet with her tears, cleaned his feet with her hair. So that's how everybody from this point on would have known who Mary was. So John is giving us the context for who the people are in this story. Let's keep going. In verse 3 it says, "So the sisters sent word to Jesus, 'Lord, the one you love is sick.'" So as we move beyond this, we're now going to get into a piece of text where Jesus is going to dialogue a little bit with his disciples. And what he's going to do in the beginning here is actually give the perspective of suffering from an eternal point of view. He's going to give God's perspective to them on suffering. And it's a perfect lesson for us because we are so myopic. We're so stuck to this world. We're tethered to the flesh and the things that we can see and feel and touch. And we forget that there is life beyond this place. And he is going to expose that reality to them. And if you're not looking with spiritual eyes, it's almost going to seem calloused the way Jesus deals with this suffering. But we're going to see differently as we look into it. So What is God's perspective on our suffering? The first thing you're going to see here is that your suffering has a purpose. Now, in suffering, this is never what you say to people. All right? Note to self. If you know someone is suffering, do not go to them and say, well, this has all got a great purpose. God is doing something great in this. It's a purpose for you. It's got a purpose. They will punch you. It's not fun to hear when you're hurting that there's a purpose. Now, we want to know that. We want that, but it's oftentimes, it's great because I can teach it from the pulpit, right? But if you're hurting and I just come to you and the first thing I say is, God's doing something great, you just need to get on board, that's super offensive. But that's the reality. God's perspective is that everything we do is for a greater purpose, a greater glory. We as His people need to remember, you and I were created as beings to bring God glory. That's your first and primary, ultimate purpose on this earth, period. Nothing else. You're a glorification being. You were created for the purpose of lifting Him up, worshiping Him with your life, with your body, with your voice, with your mind, with everything. And therefore, with that in mind, there is never a situation or instance on this earth where that is still not true. In the good times, is God God? Yes. And in the bad times, is God God? Yes. So there's never a moment where you and I are stripped of that purpose. And so in that, we can know that no matter what we are dealing with or doing, our situation is purposeful around the glorification of the Lord, specifically the person of His Son Jesus by His grace. And so let's look at this text and watch how Jesus walks them through this. In verse 4, He says, when He heard this is the news that Mary and Martha had sent, that Lazarus was sick. Just real fast, the point of them sending it wasn't just to go, oh, FYI, Lazarus is sick, see you later. They wanted Jesus to come. We're going to, as we get next week, as we look at this, they believed that if Jesus was there, He could heal them. That He could heal Lazarus. That was they knew it. Go get Jesus to heal Lazarus. So this isn't just a casual, oh, by the way, Lazarus is sick, hope you're doing well. Pray for him. No, they wanted Him to come. So look at verse 4. When He heard this, Jesus said, notice, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, that God's Son may be glorified through it. Do we know the punchline to the story? Yes. Is Lazarus going to die? Yes. Can you imagine what they're having to deal with right here? Whatever Lazarus' disease is, whatever he contracted that is causing him to get sicker and sicker and sicker and sicker, he's confronted with the reality that he has a disease that is taking his life. Do you think he's scared? He is. Mary and Martha are confronted with one of the worst positions to be on the earth possible, which is to watch their beloved family, brother, die of a disease. They're watching him get worse and worse and worse and worse. This is possibly the most painful situation that any people could be on the earth. And Jesus says, there's a greater purpose here. Think about that. This isn't going to end in death. This is going to end in the glorification of me. We see this again earlier. Do you guys remember whenever the disciples, this is in John chapter 9, the disciples see a man who had been blind from birth. We believe that there's the possibility he didn't even have eyes, that he was deformed, and they believe that there was sin related to that blindness, and they thought, well, this kid, this man must not, he either sinned in the womb somehow or his parents sinned, and they asked Jesus this. I want to put this on the screen. This is in John 9, 2 and 3. He said, His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, Jesus said. But this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in his life. And don't forget, that man had been blind his entire life. It's difficult from our perspective to look at sickness and death and deformity and pain and suffering and think that there must be something greater going on. It is hard for us to reconcile the goodness of God with this, with disease and death and pain. Yet, God continues in His Word to reinforce that reality. I know you're hurting. I know it's painful. There's a greater thing happening here. Stick with me. Stay with me. You're going to get to see something. I know you're scared. I'm here. Stick with me. There's something greater coming. So not only does suffering have a purpose, but as we keep moving, we're going to see that suffering is surrounded by God's love. See, most of us in that situation would say that our suffering is void of the love of God, correct? We would say that God has left us. We would say, where is God? Why aren't you doing something, God? Why have you done this to me, God? And we believe that our situation is completely void of His love. However, as we see here, nothing could be further from the truth. That's the ploy of Satan. Satan wants you to believe that in the midst of all that you're going through, that in the midst of your pain and suffering and your trial, your testing, that God is doing this to mess with you. And in that place, he will cause doubt and deception and try to derail you. But notice the text. Look at what John says in the midst of this. Look at verse 5. It says, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Stop right there. Do you know why John exposes this reality? It's because what Jesus is about to do seems torturous. Because if you've ever been in a place where God seems to be silent, it feels like a place of torture. But notice how he explains it. The Lord loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. He loved them. This is actually the reason. The reason that they're in this is because of his love. Keep reading with me. So, verse 6. When he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. The reason John sets it this way and explains the depth of his love is because what Jesus' actions are about to do are going to seem very heinous even. Yet they are wrapped, surrounded, encompassed, enveloped with the truth that he loves them. And he loves you equally as much as he loves them. The Bible says, for God so loved who? The world. He doesn't look at you and say, you're not quite good enough. You only get a portion of my love. No, his son died, and that death was wrapped in his love for you. And so this situation, he explains, is not void of love. It comes from a place of love because Jesus is going to do something greater. He's going to do something that's going to be even better than they could have ever imagined. 2 Peter 2:9 says this. It says, the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials. Isn't it amazing how we forget that reality? How easily we forget that God knows what he's doing. If he wanted to stop your pain right now, could he do it? Absolutely. I kind of live with a neuropathy. You guys know what neuropathy is? You ever had it? It sucks. All right? I was wearing, yesterday was, it snowed, and so I have an old pair of Oslo boots, hiking snow boots. They're like ancient. I was like, oh, I'm going to put them on. Laced them up, went out and got in the snow. About an hour later, my toes are hurting and tingling and freaking out. And I'm like, get these boots off. See, I had an injury. And I've got neuropathy in this left leg. And I've got numbness. And the skin on my calf and on my foot is just numb all the time. And I put these boots on and it hurt. And I'm sitting here going, they're just boots, God. What in the world? Just what? I'm with my kids. I'm playing. What's the problem? Can't we just, they're just toes. Can't you just like, you know, why? But there's a greater thing happening here. Look at the next verse. Suffering has a purpose. Suffering surrounded by God's love, and suffering should never deter us from our calling. As Jesus speaks to his disciples, notice what he says here as he explains. They're going to question his direction. He said, we're going to go back to Judea. Now, do you remember what happened in chapter 10? In chapter 10, verse 31 and in verse 39, the Jews tried to kill Jesus by stoning. That's why he went to Berea. That's why he left and went across the Jordan. He left Jerusalem and Judea, the whole region, because they wanted him dead. He had spoken blasphemy as claiming to be equal with God, and they were like, we have to get this guy out of here. And so he says, we're going to go back. Notice how scared the disciples get. Look at this in verse 8. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago, the Jews were there tried to stone you, and yet you're going back? You can almost hear the stammer, the stutter, wait. I don't know that we heard you, Jesus. Hang on. You said we're going back to Judea? Newsflash, they want you dead. They tried to stone you. Why would we go back? It's not in the plan. Berea? East of the Jordan? Good. West of the Jordan? Bad. Come on, Jesus, work with me. Their reluctancy and their fear is realistic and it's warranted. We know this because when Jesus gets back, ultimately they do kill him. Spoiler, they kill him. And so they're worried about this. And notice what Jesus says. In verse 9, Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? It's a weird way to answer this question. He says, anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. Verse 10, it is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. He says, look, just because things are scary, that doesn't mean that we deter from what we're here to do. He says something real similar. Remember how we went back to chapter 9 and looked at the man born blind? In verse 4 of that section, I want to put it on your screen. He says something eerily similar. Look at what he says in 9:4. He says, as long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. This reality is that while Christ is here, we do the works of the Lord. Darkness is coming. It's in the darkness that you stumble. It's not in the light. So think about this briefly. And I'm going to put this on the screen. I want you to read this. I'm going to say it to you. I wrote it out. I wanted you to hear it this way. And I want it to stick with you. Where God is, light is. That's what he's saying here. We only have so many days. It's the darkness that you stumble. Where God is, light is. This fact has nothing to do with where you are or what you are going through. Think about this with his disciples. We only have so many hours of day. It's when we're in the darkness that we stumble. Let's stay in the light where the light is. Let's work during the day. Let's not work at night. Where God is, light is. And no matter what your situation is, where God is, light is. No matter if you're suffering or in pain, where God is, light is. Do you see that reality? That's what he's saying. Your suffering should never deter you from what you've been called to do or called to be. Because where God is, light is. And in his light there is peace, there's confidence, there's direction, there's joy. And where God is not, darkness, chaos, doubt, fear. Those things prevail. So think about this. If Jesus is saying, look, if we are supposed to go to where they're going to kill us, is it better to be where God is and where they're going to kill us, or to be away from those people where God is not? Do you see that? So the answer to our question here is when we're in the midst of this suffering, we all want out of it. But let me ask you a question. If God is there in the midst of it, do we really want out? That's tough to answer. But Jesus says, no, you want to walk headlong into it, and it should not scare you. It should not derail your faith. When I was a kid living in Rome, we have these train tracks that would go through the city, and there was they had two tracks. One was a main track, and one was a track off to the side where they would park a lot of spare cars, coal cars, and box cars, and we would go play on them and climb all over them and, just be hoodlums. And I remember one day waking up and my dad coming in and saying, hey, a train derailed. And we were like, what? He's like, yeah, the train derailed. And we drove up, and there was the fire department and the police and all the Burlington Northern people were there. And I mean, there was like just cars after cars. There was a coal train, and it had come off the track. And they had piled up coal mounds everywhere, scattered. It crushed a bunch of cars that were parked nearby. Probably 50 trains just off the tracks all over the place. It was insane. It took them weeks and months to get the whole thing even picked up, let alone get the track back together. And I think every time I think of the word derailed, this is what I think of in my life. That Satan's goal is to try to do that to me. And he's going to use the things of this world to scare me so that this becomes my life. This is why we use the term, your life has become a train wreck. Right? Because when we get scared, when we choose to walk in darkness rather than walk in light, and we choose fear, and we choose the chaos of this world and just taking control rather than boldly with confidence walking in the light of Christ back, notice this, to the place where they're going to kill him. See the boldness? Oftentimes that's what's required of us. So with those things in mind, you see a little bit of a shift. Jesus explains to them, this is what we're doing. We're going to go back to Jerusalem. It's going to be scary, but look, we only have so many hours of daylight left, so we have to go while we're in the light. I'm the light of the world. Just come with me because you don't want to be in darkness. You want to be where I'm at. And so now, as he speaks to them, we're going to see a little bit of a shift because we're going to move from what is God's perspective on suffering to he's going to give them more details of how they move through it. How do we move beyond our suffering? How do we use who God is in our life to actually move? What are the truths we need to keep moving and not let our suffering be attached to us for the rest of our life, dragging us back to these points in our life? And the first truth that we're going to see here is this. You are not meant to always understand what God is doing. What a horrible reality for you and me, right? You're not always meant to know. You're not always meant to understand. We want understanding. We want the questions answered. But sometimes not getting those questions answered is better. And you're not meant to know just yet. Look in verse 11. After he had said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up." And I want you to pretend for just a second that you don't know the end of the story. Pretend you're one of the disciples standing there with Jesus, or just an onlooker and you're hearing this. Mary and Martha send messengers to tell Jesus, "Hey, Lazarus is really sick. We need you to come." And Jesus is having this dialogue with his disciples, and then he turns to them and says, "Lazarus is falling asleep and we need to go. He needs me there to wake him up." What do you think? You think, well, Lazarus, wow, he's in a seriously deep sleep. And I guess Jesus is the only guy that's going to wake him up. Okay. All right. Well, that's the answer to that question. Look at the text. Verse 12, he says, his disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." Do you see how they misunderstand what he's saying? In verse 13, Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. See, this is often the case with us. We have a specific perspective that is built within the confines of our physical reality. God is not confined to our physical reality. He can do whatever he wants. He can take dead, necrotic tissue and instantly make it alive. Is that something that can happen? We've all read Frankenstein. No, because it's been tried. How do you take something dead and make it alive and breathe life into the human body after it's been dead? Well, if he sleeps, that's different. If he sleeps, that means he's going to get better. You're going to go wake him up. You're just going to go heal him. You're going to make him better. See, Jesus is speaking in a way because he's coming from a perspective. He has a view of this that the disciples don't have. He has an eternal view of this that the disciples are missing, and therefore they're not meant to understand it. He's speaking, it's almost cavalier. Our friend Lazarus is asleep and I'm going to wake him up. Come on, let's go. They're not meant to understand. Just follow me, boys. Just follow me. Proverbs 3:5 through 8. The first 3, 5, and 6, we've probably quoted a bunch. I want to read this all once again because this is Solomon gives us a foundational truth that if we can ingest this piece into our lives, we will be the happiest church ever. Listen to this. It says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding." This is what Jesus is telling his disciples. "In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight." Look at verse 7. "Do not be wise in your own eyes." I put these two verses together because they're saying the same thing. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Don't think that you are the smartest person in the room, that everything revolves around you and that you've got it all together. Trust in the Lord. Believe in the Lord. Put your hope in the Lord. "Fear the Lord. Turn away from evil. It will be healing to your body and refreshment to your bones." Do you see the 3 fallouts of trusting in the Lord here? The first fallout is he will make your path straight. The second one is it will be healing to your body when you trust in the Lord. It'll be healing to your body. The next one is it'll be refreshing to your bones, to your soul. When you trust in the Lord, it's going to do more than just be good for you, be healthy. It's going to do amazing things in your life. And that's the reality, is that we aren't always meant to understand everything. And that leads us to the next thing, which is because we're not always meant to understand, when we don't understand, we grab the wheel. We want it our way. We will just force it to be the way we want it to be. We call it our timing versus God's timing. And the reality is that our timing weakens our faith. Listen to this. Our timing weakens our faith, but God's timing strengthens our faith. And isn't that the worst news ever? God, if you just do this way, if you just make this happen this way, it'll all work out. You need to work with me, God. You know, God, if you'll just raise up $600,000 and just make it happen, this will all work out. That's all we need. No, I'm going to do something even better, Chris. You think you need 600 grand? You don't need 600,000. Just relax. Come on, Lord, we've got to be out of this building by the 31st. Just make it easy. Just transition us right into this new building. Make it happen. Come on. No, I got something better. Trust me. Just stay with me. You don't need that money. You're going to use it somewhere else. I've got better things. Just stay with me, Chris. Stay with me, Benchmark. We got better things. Our timing weakens our faith. God's timing strengthens it. Look at this text. This is going to blow your mind. Verse 14, so then he told them plainly, and I'm surprised it's not you idiots. Lazarus is dead. He doesn't call them names. This is a good lesson for all of us. We should probably not do that anymore. He tells them plainly, because he shifts from his perspective, Lazarus has fallen asleep, to their perspective, Lazarus is dead. And in 15 he says, and for your sake, I'm glad I was not there. Do you hear this? For your sake, for your benefit. That's the word there. For your sake, for your benefit. I'm glad I was not there so that you may believe. Pistis. That's the word, believe, that your faith, that you would see something and that your faith would be strengthened. But let us go to him. Notice, imagine for just a second, if you would. Jesus gets the word that Lazarus is sick. He goes, all right, boys, pack up quick. We got to go. Let's go. 2-day hike, roughly. Depends on how you go. From where he was back to Bethany. It's going to take 2 days to get there. So it's a trek. He's hustling. And in that moment of hustling, he shows back up. And Lazarus is sick and in the bed. And he shows up and he goes, everybody, I need y'all to leave. Get out of the room. Everybody leaves the room, and all of a sudden, Jesus goes in, shuts the door. Jesus comes out. Lazarus comes out with him. Jesus heals Lazarus. It's pretty amazing, right? But then again, maybe Lazarus really wasn't that sick. Maybe Lazarus was, maybe we thought Lazarus was sick, but he really wasn't as sick as we thought. And when Jesus showed up, he just like, dude, get out of the bed, man. You're making me look bad. You don't know. See, even if Lazarus was really sick and Jesus heals him, what's the difference between that and what we're going to see? Lazarus sits 4 days in the grave to the point where his sister says, don't open the tomb, it's going to stink. He's rotten. What's the difference? If you see Jesus go in and heal Lazarus and he was sick versus seeing Jesus raise Lazarus from the dead, there is a big difference. And Jesus says it's for your benefit that we wait, that we waited these 2 days. It's for your benefit. So that when you see what's about to happen, your faith will increase. If I go on your timing, Mary, Martha, if I go on your timing, disciples, you're going to see something and it's going to be, oh, good job, Jesus. Good job. Way to go. But if you wait, I'm going to do something that is going to blow your mind and you will end up on your knees worshiping me. you're going to see that I am the Son of the living God. Isaiah 40, verse 31. Isaiah, speaking to Israel, says, those who wait on the Lord. See that little piece? Those who wait. Those who wait. Who don't push their agenda. Who don't grab the wheel and say, I'm going to do this my way. Who wait and watch the Lord work. Those that wait for God's timing so that their faith might be strengthened, so that the benefit and the blessing might be theirs through the glorification of the Lord in the midst of His glory and His grace. Those who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. You know why? Because if you're having to wait on God, you feel destroyed. You feel your strength is leaving you. But when He shows up, what does that do to your soul? Your strength gets renewed to the point where you now realize why you waited. And you don't just, it doesn't say those who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall go about the rest of their lives and be happy and everything will be normal. It says, they shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and they'll never be weary. They'll walk and they can go forever on that little nugget of seeing God come through as they waited on Him. Do you see that? Your timing will always, in every way, weaken your ability to see the depth of His love and the grandeur of His glory. But if we wait and let Him work and pray and are patient in the midst of Him moving, your faith will be strengthened and it will be for your benefit. And beyond that, the last piece is we move through our struggles and our suffering by acting in confidence. So you have to be confident in this. This is a piece of faith. When you're confident in the Lord, this is what happens. Notice here, your confidence in the Lord will begin to move you beyond your suffering, regardless of your understanding. Do you see anywhere in this text a piece of knowledge that supersedes natural understanding? Did Jesus say, fellas, you need to go back and know your word more? All you have to do is just have confidence in what God is going to do and who He is. Look at this text. Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, that means twin, said to the rest of the disciples, let us also go, that we may die with Him. It's almost, what an ignorant statement, right? It's almost as if, again, Jesus should have said, Lord, what have you given me? You big bag of morons. But notice in verse 17, there is no follow-up to this. Thomas says, let us also go that we may die with Him. 17, Jesus doesn't clarify. If you go to 17, the next verse is there at Mary and Martha's. Jesus doesn't say anything to that. You know why? Because two things are being said here. We look at this and we go, oh my gosh, Thomas, just shut up. Just stop talking, dude. That's our feeling. But Thomas is actually saying something very important. Go back to chapter 9, verse 31. They tried to stone Jesus. In 39, they tried to do it again. Here in the first part of this chapter, the disciples go, wait. You want to go back to Judea? Jesus says Lazarus is dead. Thomas is confident. Let us go. We can die with Him. I don't see a Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure type situation here. Let us go, man. I don't see that. Let's just go die with Him, bro. No. I see a guy who is looking, let's go. If we die, we die. I think that's why you don't see Jesus correcting him. Did Jesus correct the other fellas? Well, if he sleeps, he's going to wake up. He's dead. He doesn't correct here. The text moves on. You know why? Because I think Thomas actually does something, even though it's ignorant, it's done something with confidence. He's trusting in the Lord his God. Jesus has done so much more, fellas. He's already raised 2 other people from the dead. We see in Luke and we see in Matthew that he's already raised. He raised Jairus' daughter. He's raised the widow's son from the dead. He's already done this. Look, if he's raising people from the dead and he's going to do this for Lazarus, yeah, it's going to be dangerous. Let's go with him. If we die, we die. If we die, we die. If we die, we die. That's okay. Because I believe your confidence in the Lord is what moves you through the midst of fear, through the midst of pain and suffering. We have a God who always comes through, whether in this life or the next. You don't have to be afraid. And in confidence, we follow him, knowing he's done well for us, knowing his deep love for us, knowing that he's got greater purposes for his glory and for our benefit. We go ahead and move forward in faith, trusting in confidence who he is. I'll leave you with a quote. This is from John Piper, and I think it's really fitting for where we are in this text as we move on next week into continuing the story with Lazarus. John says this: the deepest need that you and I have in weakness and adversity is not quick relief, but the well-grounded confidence that what is happening to us is part of the greatest purpose of God in the universe. The glorification of the grace and power of his Son. The grace and the power that bore him to the cross and kept him there until the work of love was done. How beautiful. There's not a single person in here who's not hurting, suffering. We've said that. And I think it is imperative that we realize as a church that who we really are. It's so easy to forget who we really are and why we're really here. It's easy for us to forget that who God is. And when we put our perspective above his, and it's a train wreck. So let us move through our pain and suffering, and let us dig up the anchors from behind us that keep dragging us back there. And let's trust in the Lord so that it can be healing to our bodies and refreshment to our bones.